What's up, Flannelverse? What's up, Endgamers? This is the start of Week 11, Thursday Night Football. We've got the Commanders at the Eagles. Should be a fun game. Two running quarterbacks, two kind of fun teams. I'm here, of course, with Adam, ShipMyMoney, Scherer to break this one down. We're going to go position by position: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defense kickers at the end. Actually, that's the end for this show. We're not going to be building lineups at the end of this one. We're just focusing on DraftKings, of course. A lot of what we talk about here also going to be applicable to FanDuel. Adam, I know you started doing your NBA shows. That was just this week, right? You started doing your NBA shows. How is that going? Are you enjoying talking about NBA, or are you just already tired of it?
Yeah, no, I started that on, I don't know what day I started that. Monday. Didn't do it yesterday. Had the Endgame show and didn't have time to prep. But yeah, no, I'm enjoying it. It was nice to get back to it. I'd kind of gotten into, and I'm sure you know how this goes, like when there's like a break between seasons or you just like aren't doing a lot of work, it's hard to like get back motivated to like do anything again. So it was nice to just like get back in the swing of it, do a couple shows. It was fun. Yeah, so good to be back doing that, talking about NBA, and yeah, gonna keep doing that going forward.
You're cutting out for me still. So
you were cutting out for me
a couple times before the
know.
show. Oh really?
Yeah.
All right, let me check in with chat. Because I was like, you were kind of following what you were saying, but also like you were just cutting out.
Yeah, it's the same. Like I'm missing.
So let me just check in with chat, see if
I keep missing like
now you're frozen for me,
from you, and then you'll come back.
Oh, Steven says that we're okay for him. Like both of us are okay for him. So let me
It's you.
Okay. Jake says that you are fine and I'm cutting out. Shit. Okay. Weird. I'm not getting any kind of indication on my end that my internet's bad. So let me try. I'm going to try switching my wireless real quick. This is a bad way to start a show. I just assumed that it was on your end, so I didn't even.
I have never had tech issues on shows. I don't know why you would make that assumption.
I actually did just last week, but then I haven't been since then because I just switched my wireless to the box in my room. So hopefully I'm going to be better now with the new wireless. Yeah. All right. We will continue. So you're saying that it's a little bit tough getting into the swing of things. I apparently everybody else heard you just fine. So I guess we don't need to recap it, but yeah, you're just starting over. Not always fun to start new stuff, but
yeah, I was just saying how like when you're not working, it's easy to get lazy. And so it's nice to get back into like a routine and give me something to do in the afternoon.
Yeah, for sure. And NBA, I don't know if this is true for you. It takes me so much more time to prep for an NBA slate than an NFL slate. I guess maybe that's just because I like am already in the swing of things with NFL, but like every time I start in with a new NBA slate, like it takes me hours to do like the expert survey and that kind of stuff for NBA, because it's like you got to wrap your head around like what are the injuries, have the lineups change. And I guess part of it is also I'm not playing every day because I have NFL stuff, but does NBA take you just significantly more time in general?
Yes and no. So like everything you're saying is true. But I mentioned this on one of my shows the other day that I think it's going to take me a week or two to kind of get into the flow of it. NBA, like I'm really good at just like remembering stuff. So like I just have rates and numbers and rotations and everything like memorized usually. And so in the past, I've been able to do NBA shows, literally just roll out of bed, look at the injury report, go through the entire show, and not really have to prep at all other than, pulling some stuff up during the show to make sure that I'm remembering things right. But because it's been so long since I've actually talked about NBA stuff, I don't have as much stuff committed to memory now. So like I'm trying to do shows and pull things up and actually look at some stuff ahead of time so I know what I'm talking about. So it has kind of been a pain in the ass. But I assume it'll take me like a week or two to just get back to where I know without looking.
I've never been at the point where I like committed all of the rotations and stuff to memory, in part because I've only actually done 1 year of NBA content. So it's like, you don't really need to know that stuff just to play NBA DFS. It's kind of like, and I kind of got a good idea because I was playing every day, but like, you really don't need to generally to play because you can count on other people for projections and stuff. But when I'm actually doing content, I'm like, I want to get to the point where I have all the rotations memorized and a new starting lineup comes in and I know that that's different than what it has been in the past. But that takes some time with 30 teams.
Yeah. And to your point, like, and that's really the thing. Like in the past, I've been able to, I'd get on a show at 10 a.m. LaMelo Ball's out. Without even looking, I can tell you within a point or two what Terry Rozier's usage rate without LaMelo on the floor is, because I've been talking about it every day all year. But that's not something that I actually need for DFS. And then I haven't talked about it in almost a year. So now I'm just like, I don't know what the guy's usage rate is. I just know he's probably better.
Yeah. Ooh, Chuck Cheese says playoff best ball. Is it already out? There's kind of a tease that Underdog was going to be coming out with playoff best ball, like way too early playoff best ball, whatever they call it. I love NFL playoff best ball, so maybe we'll do a stream on that at some point. But we're 5 minutes in. We're going to get complaints about not starting the show early enough. But I kind of wanted to make sure that the internet is working before we really get into the meat of this anyway. So
yeah, I've heard everything you've said during this part of the conversation.
Okay, good. All right, then we're good to go. Again, we're going to be going in order on the, you can see the sidebar, the order we're going to talk about this. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to both of our YouTube channels. I'm in the Flannelverse, trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Adam, Endgame Syndicate's YouTube channel, also growing quickly, but brand new this year. We're trying to grow pretty small new channels, so would appreciate it if you would subscribe to both of our channels. Of course, liking the videos, commenting, hitting the notification button if you want to get notifications when we go live. All of that is helpful for us and the YouTube algorithm. All right, let's get into quarterbacks, and really fun one as far as quarterbacks go. Usually the conversation here is pretty straightforward. We talk about, the quarterbacks look okay, usually won about 50%. I don't know. It's like, I guess it changes slate to slate, but this one is a really fun one because we have two elite rushing quarterbacks in Jalen Hurts and Jayden Daniels. So it's a little bit more interesting to talk about the stacking aspect of things, and how much ownership we want to get to. At captain, Jalen Hurts coming in at 20% projected ownership. Jayden Daniels coming in at 14% projected ownership. In the flex, we have Jalen Hurts coming in at just under 50% projected ownership. Jayden Daniels at 46% projected ownership. Adam, that's a lot of ownership going to these quarterbacks, but kind of hard to argue with it given how good they are. How much you get into of each?
Yeah, no real issues with the ownership. The only concern, I guess, is that, it is a lot of raw ownership. So you just kind of run into the duping aspect. But the nice thing, like you said, neither of these guys are quarterbacks that you necessarily have to be stacking with multiple guys, because they do give you rushing upside. Jalen Hurts in particular, of course, gives you a ton of touchdown equity as well. Not that Jayden Daniels doesn't have it, but Washington doesn't use Daniels around the goal line the way that Philadelphia uses Hurts around the goal line. So more touchdown equity, of course, for Hurts. Makes them both look really, really good. Right now, I do think they're both going a little bit under-owned at captain and over-owned at flex. But in terms of total ownership, I think it's pretty much correct. I just, would allocate a little bit more to captain for them and a little bit less to flex.
As far as schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, the Commanders have allowed the 17th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, so they're just right dead even. And Marshawn Lattimore is inactive for this one, so we don't have that addition. So kind of a league average matchup for Jalen Hurts. The Eagles defense has allowed the fourth fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So kind of a tougher matchup for Jayden Daniels. And I don't think that do we have any outliers in terms of, actually here, yeah, that's a slight outlier. So the Eagles defense actually allowing slightly more than average fantasy points per game to quarterbacks on the ground, but just barely, not by a ton. So not really standing out from that perspective. And then the Commanders defense a little bit worse for quarterbacks on the ground, a little bit better through the air. But I honestly am not seeing anything that is such a big outlier that I think it's really worth factoring in the ground versus air part of it. I think the more interesting conversation with both these quarterbacks is how are we stacking them? Because with elite rushing quarterbacks like this, my general rule is you don't need to be stacking them. And I think that's true even if they're in the captain spot. But I'm kind of wondering if that would be a unique way to play, like something that the field is going to underutilize, having either of these quarterbacks in the captain spot with multiple pass catchers, which is, on other sites like that'll be very common. But I kind of wonder with these particular quarterbacks that people will actually underutilize the overstacking side of things. What do you think of that approach, Adam, of, maybe making lineups overstacking the quarterbacks, and how much are you getting to it?
So I think the issue with these two quarterbacks specifically, like obviously it's fine if you go that route. Like if you can get a lineup that has Hurts at captain with, AJ Brown plus DeVonta Smith, great. But that's going to be pretty expensive.
Yeah.
The issue is kind of limited stacking options total, because with Washington, you have a massive amount of targets going to Terry McLaurin. You have Noah Brown as the clear wide receiver 2 there. You have Zach Ertz at tight end, who's not even particularly cheap at 5,600. Then it's kind of falls off a cliff. Maybe Luke McCaffrey gets open for a big play or two. Maybe Ben Sinnott is involved for like the first time all season, but there's not, Zacchaeus is behind Noah Brown. There's not a lot of depth that you want to be getting to on the Washington side. And there's only so many Jayden Daniels plus 2 out of 3 of, McLaurin, Ertz, Noah Brown lineups that you're going to want to play. And then for Philadelphia, it's pretty much the same thing. You can obviously make the AJ Brown, DeVonta Smith lineups. You can count Saquon Barkley as a pass catcher, obviously. But beyond that, you have Goddard at tight end, who's relatively expensive. You have Jahan Dotson, revenge game, but not particularly good or heavily utilized or cheap. He's 4K. So I think it's a fine approach, but you kind of just run out of guys that you want to pair the quarterback with, in multi pass catcher stacks pretty quickly.
That's a good point. Like both of these, I mean, that's kind of going to be an issue on this slate in general, is that there's just not that many players that we really want to play. So it's going to kind of condense the player pool, which then is going to add to dupe issues. So yeah, it's maybe something that maybe I'll play around with it later on the later show to see if that's something that I can make that looks viable, because it's an approach that I want to do, because I know that the field is going to underutilize multiple pass catchers in the flex with the quarterback a captain. But that's true. Like it is you have limited options, which then is going to just kind of reinforce dupe issues potentially if more of the field does take that approach. So I don't know, something that maybe I'll try. Do you get a sense, looking at your lineup so far, how much you are getting to these quarterbacks in the captain spot unstacked or with one stacking partner? Do you have any kind of indication there?
I don't have it filtered out that way. I do know that Hurts is showing up as the optimal captain 18.5% of the time, Daniels 17.5%. And looking at who they are paired with most frequently, it does just, suggest what we're talking about, where you have limited pass catchers and also stacking isn't as big a priority with them. The guy that shows up most often at flex with Jayden Daniels at captain is Jalen Hurts. And the guy that shows up most often at flex with Jalen Hurts at captain is Jayden Daniels. Whereas when you get more statuesque quarterbacks, it's almost always their wide receiver 1 showing up like 70% of the time optimal. Here you have the opposing quarterback as the highest optimal guy. And in both cases, like Jalen Hurts is an optimal flex with Daniels the captain 51% of the time, Daniels 43% of the time, tied with Saquon Barkley. So you just have lower concentration on who shows up most frequently with each guy, which makes sense given their rushing upside. And then also it's not their wide receiver 1 either. Yeah,
that is kind of interesting, and probably does mean that you're getting some that are unstacked, I would guess, which is totally fine on this slate. So yeah, again, with stacking with these quarterbacks, you don't really need to force the stacks. Even at captain, I don't think you need to force it. I generally am going to want to have at least one pass catcher, but not quite as important as usual. Anything else to say about quarterbacks before we move on to running backs?
No.
All right, we'll move on and talk about the running backs on this slate. Let me pull them up here. Nice. Saquon Barkley leading the field by a country mile in terms of projection, more than double the second best running back in terms of projection, at least at fantasy points. Let's check on Roto Grinders as well. I'm guessing it is, about double on Roto Grinders as well. Saquon Barkley looking pretty great, getting 41.5% ownership in the flex. At captain, we have Saquon coming in at just under 13% ownership. Commanders defense has been, I feel like there's been sort of a discourse, and maybe there are some stats that indicate that it is more of a run funnel this year than a pass funnel. But they've actually allowed the 8th fewest scheduled adjusted fantasy points per game to running backs on the season. So not quite the run funnel that it has looked like at times, and maybe by some stats. So I don't know what to make of the matchup exactly. I'm not sure it matters that much with Saquon Barkley, as long as it's not like a bottom barrel matchup. I don't know. What do you think of this? So we're getting 55% or so ownership going to Saquon. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I have him coming in a little bit over owned both at captain and at flex. Nothing too crazy, but by a bigger margin than pretty much anybody else on the slate. But still obviously optimal a very high percentage of the time. Third highest flex optimal percentage at like 39%, fourth highest captain optimal percentage at about 10%. So still a good play. Just I think coming in a little bit over owned. To your point about run funnels too, Washington does have a very big gap in their schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed on the ground to running backs and through the air. They've allowed the fourth most schedule adjusted rushing fantasy production this year. But they've been very, very good at limiting pass catching fantasy production, which could be, scheme related, but also would they be that good at it if they were facing Saquon Barkley every week? So I don't want to downgrade him too much for that, for what Washington's done to less talented running backs so far this season. But they have really given it up on the ground so far. And obviously Barkley's just really, really good and also in a very good offense, has tons of touchdown equity. We've seen Jalen Hurts around the goal line as expected, steal a bunch of touchdowns, but if they don't actually get tackled on the 1 or the half-yard line, you should still see Barkley. He's run bad, I think, in that department as far as like they are always getting tackled at exactly the 1-yard line so far this season.
Yeah. Yeah, great call out there about that distinction here. And I've sorted it by receiving. It's the worst possible matchup for running backs through the air, but actually not bad for Barkley on the ground. It's a positive matchup for running backs on the ground, as you said. So that is a good note on Barkley. How would you break up? So sub 13%, where did you have him get in his projected ownership at captain? Do you think 13% feels too much to you for Barkley?
13's closer to correct. I have him at like
Okay.
17% right now, 16 to 17% projected, and 10% chance of being optimal. So either of those numbers, I think he's going a little bit over owned, but is still, one of the top 4 captain plays on the slate.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. And then behind Barkley, kind of interesting, Kenneth Gainwell and Will Shipley have both gotten a little bit more run recently than they were earlier in the season. And sort of interesting to me, but the ownership is actually higher than I kind of thought it was going to be on Gainwell. So I still really like him, but man, coming in at 17% ownership here. I've seen other places. I think this is the highest that I've seen in terms of projected ownership for Gainwell. But people were talking about him. I remember that there were multiple times last week that I was doing shows for the main slate on Sunday, and people kept bringing him up like, oh, any interest in playing Gainwell? And I was like, why are people talking about Kenneth Gainwell on a main slate? But I famously play a lot of backup running backs on main slates when they're in particularly good spots. Gainwell, though, the reason I think that people keep bringing him up is over the past 4 games, 30 carries and 4 targets on 20.6% route participation. So relative to earlier in the year, 30 carries in the past 4 games is nothing to sneeze at. Will Shipley also 19 carries over the past 4 games, but 0 targets on 1 total route run. Gainwell's 3,200. Shipley is 400. Both are sort of intriguing to me, just on a slate where we're sort of lacking for great value and great contrarian plays. I think I kind of have interest in both. How much do you get into of Gainwell and or Shipley?
Yeah, I think your final point there is the one that's really driving Gainwell, because I only have him projected for 3.8 DraftKings points, and I have him showing up optimal 15% of the time. So I don't think that 16, 17% ownership projection is crazy. I think it's pretty close to where it should be. And a lot of it just doesn't have to do with Kenneth Gainwell. It has to do with Zacchaeus and Luke McCaffrey and Jahan Dotson and De'Ami Brown, kind of being your secondary or tertiary options to get to for value. We just have relatively healthy teams here. We don't have any really good 2K value that you're going to be confident in. And so it kind of just loops back to Kenneth Gainwell being a useful piece of the, sub 4K guys. He's going to be on the field as much as most of them. So it makes him look fine. Obviously, you don't have a lot of confidence in his production, but he just projects as one of the better values on the slate. I think that 15% ownership is fine. For Will Shipley at 400, 2% projected ownership, 2% chance of being optimal. He's just your standard sub 1K. Maybe something really weird happens, but it probably won't.
Yep. And Shipley, what is his ownership coming in at? 3% projected ownership. So I think Not UM was saying, FYI, I think Shipley just closes out final drives and blowouts. True. I think that you're right about that. But also, that could happen here. Certainly could be a blowout here.
You've also had Barkley kind of get banged up mid-game in the last couple of games. Didn't end up like leaving either game, but did sort of miss drives here or there. So I think that's a good point too. But then it also just goes back to, I don't have a high projection on Kenneth Gainwell. Like 3.8 fantasy points is not expecting him to do a lot, and he's still showing up as optimal here. So, if he were being projected like 5-6 fantasy points by the industry because they think he's like cutting into Saquon Barkley's role in a real way, I would disagree with that. But as is, it's still just like, yeah, he's the backup running back, and at 3,200 he shows up.
Yeah. Well, this is in a competitive game with no Barkley injury. Gainwell seems like a bad play. I don't hate it, but I guess I had missed that Saquon Barkley had in-game injuries in multiple of these games, so maybe that would actually change things a bit. Makes him a little bit less appealing there for sure. One note that I took is he's over the past 4 games, 6.2 expected fantasy points per game for Kenneth Gainwell. So like based on that, I was thinking like he's actually like maybe being under projected. But I guess I missed that there were some Saquon Barkley injuries, and maybe that would change things a little bit in terms of that equation. Maybe takes away some of his standalone value. Obviously, still has great contingent upside because I think if something does happen to Saquon, Shipley is going to be the man. So I think I still kind of like it, but maybe like it a little bit less now that I hear that Barkley's been dealing with injuries.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, like, looking at the projections that I have in front of me, I don't really think people are projecting him wrong. Like, I think he's being projected as the clear running back 2 to Barkley. I don't think that people are overweighting the last couple of weeks too much. So I think that for the most part, it would kind of be double counting it to say, like, to knock his projection even lower than it already is.
Joey Prindle asking, this is my cousin, by the way, how does your lineup construction change when building in higher stakes with lower entries? Do you think ownership in Sims is accurate for those tournaments? Not sure how chalky to go with optimals. Do you think ownership in Sims is accurate for those tourneys? So you use Sims more than I do. So based on what you've seen from Saber Sim, do you think ownership is accurate for smaller field, higher dollar contests in
I'm not
general?
sure. I don't really play them, so I'm not
Okay.
sure. In general, your lineup construction changes just in the sense, and this is true across pretty much any sport when you're talking about smaller field, higher entry stuff. Ownership's going to go up on the chalkiest pieces. It's going to come down on the fringe pieces. In some cases, you'll see it overcorrect. Not always, but also, you don't have to worry about dupes as much just because the field is smaller. So, that becomes less of a concern. That's one reason why I do kind of like playing those in Showdown, because I'm not great at the dupe thing, as we've talked about. But I haven't been playing them much this year. I've been trying to get better at the large field stuff. So, like you're just going to see chalk ownership go up more. I think there's a tendency, I would say, in like 3 max type stuff, I would guess that chalk ownership ends up just coming in pretty efficient. And in single entry, I would guess a lot of times it ends up coming in over owned. In a lot of cases, it gets like too concentrated. But in general, that's like the trend you're going to see. And you don't have to get as different. Trying to beat 400 people is much different than trying to beat 50,000 or whatever it is.
So I also don't really play a ton of high stakes, but I've had a lot of conversations about this, about like ownership for different levels. My assumption would be that like it's probably pretty accurate for the higher owned players for large, smaller field stuff. But then because like so few, players playing a lower owned player, you can be off really quickly just by like a couple people having exposure to a player that you're not expecting. So I would guess it's not nearly as good for the lower owned plays in smaller field stuff.
Yeah. Talking Sims specifically, this is something that we've talked about a lot at
Yeah.
Endgame. Nerdy's talked about it a lot. Brick's talked about it a lot in videos. But yeah, there are issues like you're saying, because like if you're talking about a 100 person tournament and you project Dallas Goedert for 20% ownership and only 15 people play him instead of 20, like that's 15% instead of 20%. Whereas
Right.
in large field, you're just going to be closer because there's just more lineups, and one individual user doing something different than you're anticipating isn't throwing your numbers off like it does in small field stuff. So you are going to have issues there. And that's a whole separate thing with like the way sim products work. Can be problematic in your small field stuff if they're not like sampling from larger lineups and giving you different player pools for each sim and all of that. Like there are issues that come with small field.
Yeah, exactly. And then, other ways that it, lineup construction changes is maybe I don't focus as much like in a large field contest. If I have a quarterback at captain, I require multiple pass catches because you're like basically trying to hit the optimal in large field. Whereas in smaller field stuff, you don't need to necessarily, if you have like, there are a few different receivers and like it's an open situation, you don't really have a confident read in who you think is going to score the touchdown. You can play the quarterback and the captain and just have one stacking partner. You don't need to force in a second for like non-rushing quarterbacks. So just kind of opening up the rules a little bit is basically how I change my lineup construction for smaller field stuff, I guess, would be the biggest thing that I change there. And obviously you leave less salary on the table, maybe no salary on the table, that kind of stuff as well. You just kind of loosen up a lot of the rules that you use to get different in large field stuff would be a difference for me. All right. Anything else on Philadelphia running backs?
No.
All right. On the Washington side, we've had Brian Robinson has been out for, I believe, the past 2 weeks. Returning for this game, kind of unclear what the role is going to look like as he returns. Robinson is 8,200 projecting for just over 10 fantasy points. Ekeler 8,000 projecting for 8 fantasy points. And I think it's about the same. Yeah, it looks like it's about the same here. Robinson projecting a little bit better than Ekeler on both sites, and both kind of coming in low owned as a result of the maybe as a result of the uncertainty. I'm not sure if this is going to change because maybe some sites are projecting Robinson out, some have him in, and it's kind of a crapshoot right now. But currently, both projecting for very little ownership. 16.5 going to Robinson, 13% going to Ekeler, and that is in the flex. In the captain, we have Robinson coming in at just sub 3% ownership, Ekeler coming in sub 2% ownership. Obviously, I guess I shouldn't say obviously. If these numbers stick at him, I would think that Robinson is a slam dunk and Ekeler a pretty strong enough play. Also, what are you seeing in terms of projected ownership and how do you feel about it for these guys?
Yeah, so I mean, I have Robinson coming in at 28% projected flex ownership, 4% captain. I think his optimal rate for me is about 27% at flex. So pretty much correct ownership there. And then same kind of thing for Ekeler, 18% projected flex ownership, 18% chance of being optimal at flex. I think you're kind of seeing a pricing issue here where Austin Ekeler's salary is up to 8K because of Brian Robinson being out the last couple of games. So you are overpaying for Austin Ekeler's typical production and role with Brian Robinson in, but you do have the aspect of maybe Robinson is a little bit limited. Also, it's a 1-game sample, and Ekeler does clearly have a role on this team even when Robinson is active. You're typically getting somewhere around 50% of the rushing market share for Robinson. Obviously, Ekeler involved in the passing game too, so he does still have a path to being good at that salary, but it's not, I don't think either one is really a slam dunk because Robinson is likely to be sharing carries. He has, all season long. Granted, he's been very good this year. He's been very productive and has plenty of upside here, but it's not a great matchup either. So I think the salaries are just kind of efficient. In Eckler's case, probably a little bit overpriced considering that Robinson is back. It's hard to, so Robinson missed a game earlier this year in week 6, but you can't really take too much away from the workload in week 7 because that was the game where they beat the shit out of the Panthers. Jayden Daniels got hurt. It didn't matter. Mariota put up like 100 points. And so you had a game where like, they didn't actually have to show how they were going to handle Robinson really in his first game back because it was just a non-competitive game. Everybody got some carries. So my expectation is that you see typical opportunities for Robinson, getting around 50% or so of the rushing market share. He was a full participant in practice, and he wasn't like in the games that he missed too. It wasn't, Robinson's clearly out, midweek or something. It was kind of, in both games, I think, if I remember correctly, Robinson's going to like warm up and then ended up not playing. I think last week even he had been expected to play and then didn't play. So, I think it's more likely than not, I think, that he is just like a full go and fully healthy at this point. Obviously, that's not a guarantee, but that's the way that I'm approaching it.
Yeah, I think that's right. So you think the ownership that you have is about efficient for these guys, which obviously your ownership is higher than what we're seeing at Roto Grinders, and strikes me as more efficient also. So it sounded like you're getting like just under 30% for Robinson in total. And Ekeler, I don't know.
Just under 20 on Ekeler.
Okay, yeah, that does seem a little bit better than that feels more efficient to me. I did pull up. Steven said with Robinson Ekeler, that's another place I would look at defense split in running back versus running back receiving versus rushing. And as you can see here,
with Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's a bad matchup for both, but not like nothing too crazy. All right. And then I'm probably not getting into any Jeremy McNichols. Are you getting to any?
Sorry, I was trying to figure out why Brian Robinson wasn't in some of my data. Jeremy McNichols, 5% chance of being optimal, 6% chance of being optimal, 5% flex ownership. And this is another, kind of it's one of these guys on the slate where with normal pricing, McNichols would be kind of interesting as a value play. But because of Robinson being out the last couple of weeks and McNichols having an actual role, he's up to 2,800. So, could he vulture a touchdown? Sure. Could Robinson re-aggravate his hamstring? Sure. Could Ekeler get hurt because he's Austin Ekeler? Absolutely. But he's the third string running back here with Robinson back, and there's no real way around that.
Adam, aren't you a Commanders fan?
Yes.
Do you own any Commanders gear? You just only ever wear your Baltimore Orioles hats.
Yeah, I have some like Commanders t-shirts. I have like a Kirk Cousins jersey. I think I have an RG3 jersey somewhere. I'm scared to buy a Jayden Daniels jersey.
You don't want to curse him?
What'd you say? Because
you don't want to curse him?
Yes. Like I think my mom got me like an RG3 jersey for Christmas his rookie year. And then that was basically the end of his career. So I'm like terrified to get a Jayden Daniels jersey.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, he's really fun. So I get not wanting to curse him, but also would be a fun jersey to have. All right. Anything else on running backs?
No.
All right. Move on. Talk about wide receivers. AJ Brown, the top projection here. He is 10,000, projecting for just under 17 here, and at RotoGrinders projecting for just under 18 fantasy points, about 37% ownership in the flex. At captain, AJ Brown coming in at 12% ownership. I'm pretty into it. I think AJ Brown going to be a player that I end up overweight on. I don't want to say significantly necessarily, but based on these numbers, he looks really good to me. How much are you getting to AJ Brown? How much do you want to play of him?
Yeah, same page. 14% projected captain ownership coming into AJ Brown. I have him optimal at captain 18.5% of the time. That's actually slightly higher than Jayden Daniels. So I have him tied with Jalen Hurts as the most frequently optimal captain on the slate. And he's projected to be, by a very small margin, the fourth highest owned captain, very close to Daniels in ownership, slightly behind Hurts and Barkley. But I like Brown a lot here. Marshawn Lattimore not playing again. Washington secondary is not particularly good. Looks like a good coverage matchup as well. They play enough man coverage that looks good for AJ Brown. So I really like getting him. Also, he's less expensive than those other three guys by a little bit. So I like AJ Brown a lot here.
Yeah, good. We are on the same page. Commanders defense giving up the 13th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So everything looks really good, and they haven't been as much of a pass funnel this year as they have been in years past. But I don't really think much has changed with the defense. So I kind of think, we could see a spike week at the very least. You
are very live to be really pissed off if you play AJ Brown, because St. Juste might just like commit 5 different pass interference penalties and not give up 200 yards.
Yeah. Good point. And also, like, if they get ahead, it could just be a game script where like they're not passing in the second half. But hopefully,
Washington's one of the best offenses in the league, though, so it's relatively unlikely that happens.
Yeah, it's less likely than usual. That's true. All right, good. So we're on the same page. Both like AJ Brown quite a bit. DeVonta Smith projected for 4% captain ownership, coming in at 25% ownership in the flex. He is 8,600. I kind of like that. Also, I don't like it as much as AJ Brown, but sub 30% feels pretty good for DeVonta Smith at 8,600. How much you get into there?
Yeah, exact same page. Like, I think he's behind AJ Brown pretty clearly, showing up 8.5% of the time as the optimal captain, but he's only projected for like 6% ownership. So I think when you kind of just think about everything I've said throughout the show, it all does logically make sense how this is playing out. Like, I thought Jalen Hurts was a little bit under-owned at captain. I thought Barkley was over-owned at captain, and then AJ Brown and DeVonta Smith both coming in under-owned as well. Smith by a bit less than Brown, which makes sense because Brown is the better receiver, the more heavily utilized receiver, and all of that. But you're getting the salary discount on Smith. He can still obviously make big plays here. He's still the wide receiver 2 in this offense. The coverage matchup doesn't look as good for him as for Brown, looking at the fantasy points data. But, again, that's just one data point that in a one-game sample isn't going to typically move things that much. It's kind of just something to keep in mind. I think DeVonta Smith at modest ownership looks pretty good as well. I think in the flex spot, he's pretty much correctly owned. That is one difference, and it kind of evens things out too between him and AJ Brown from a leverage standpoint. I think Brown is going more under-owned at captain than Smith is, but I actually think Brown's going a little bit over-owned at flex, whereas I think Smith is like neutral at flex. So in terms of total ownership versus the field, I think that they're both similarly under-owned.
What do you have the ownership coming in at for DeVonta Smith in the flex?
23.5.
Okay, so it's pretty close, I think, both places, and you have that as slightly over-owned,
Under-owned. So I mean, I have 24%
gotcha, but not
optimal. Yeah,
okay.
I have 24% optimal at flex. I have about 24% projected ownership. But then I have him going under-owned at captain. Whereas Brown, I think I have projected for like 34% flex ownership. The optimal rate is like 32%, but then I have him way under-owned at captain. So it ends up coming out similarly in the aggregate.
All right, so I pulled up the wide receiver coverage matchup. So we can see it's actually the best possible matchup for of these guys. Jahan Dotson actually has the best matchup, but still projected for 0.1 expected fantasy points per route run. Dallas Goedert second, AJ Brown third. You can see not as good for DeVonta Smith. It's a slight negative matchup there. Interesting. Is this what you're looking at when you're talking about the coverage stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, and then so behind AJ Brown and DeVonta Smith, we do have Jahan Dotson there, and he's still running a lot of routes. He's 4,000. I was really hoping Jahan Dotson would be kind of a lot less expensive here. 4,000 is quite a bit to play for Jahan Dotson, but we'll come in at low ownership as a result. 0.3% at captain for Jahan Dotson in the flex, coming in at 6% ownership. I hate to say it, but it's kind of intriguing to me. Like I don't really love the idea of playing Jahan Dotson, but at 6% ownership, sort of hard to not have, kind of piques my interest a little bit. Just 14 targets on the season in 9 games, but it's on 70% route participation. As you said earlier, it is a revenge game, which I don't know. Like I think like people talk about like logically, like these teams are not going to factor in anything like that. They're not going to change the game plan at all. But I kind of think like there is also a human element to it, or maybe it happens to some extent where teams are maybe like, all right, let's get Jahan Dotson the ball. So I don't think it's wrong to like factor it in just a little bit. Like maybe they're a little bit motivated to, if they're in a spot where they can get him an easy touchdown, they might want to. So maybe a slight boost there. I don't know. What do you think about Jahan Dotson and the narrative that he's playing in a revenge game here?
I mean, there's also the team-based narrative where they gave up, I think, like a 3rd-round pick for Dotson. They gave up like similar, draft capital that like the Bills gave up for Amari Cooper. So from like an organizational standpoint, they'd probably like to maybe show him off a little bit against his former team after kind of getting fleeced. But no, I mean, it's obviously not going to change projections, much. But yeah, I mean, I guess he looks slightly better than he would if he were just playing a random team. But yeah, it all comes back to he runs routes. He's going to probably run more routes than everybody except for AJ Brown, DeVonta Smith, as far as wide receivers go. He's not very good. He doesn't get open. That is a trend going back to Washington and why he's not on Washington anymore. So yeah, he's going to be out there. He's cheap. He's going to run routes, and he probably won't get open and probably won't get targeted, but he'll run routes. And we don't, again, it also just goes back to, we don't have a lot of good cheap plays. Like you can say you don't like Jahan Dotson. I don't like Jahan Dotson. I also don't really like Kenneth Gainwell. I don't really like Zacchaeus. I don't like any of these guys. I have 3% projected ownership coming into Dotson. I think his optimal rate in the flex is like 3%. He is just a random dude that probably won't do anything, but that is most guys in this game outside of the stars that everybody wants to play.
Interesting. So you have him at 3%. So Rotogranus has him at 6% projected ownership. I was thinking that felt a little bit low to me, but you think that's actually a little bit high based on like your optimal rate. You have at 3%. So maybe
I actually have 4%. I round.
Okay. Yeah. It's tough because he's 4,000. Like I would love him if he were 200. I would definitely want to take shots there. 4,000 is like he actually needs to put up. I don't know. Probably he needs to put up like at least 9 fantasy points. I don't really want to say it because we've had Dalton Kincaid again was optimal at like 7,400 when he put up 9.7 fantasy points or some shit like that. So there's no guarantee, but probably needs to put up some fantasy points to be relevant. I guess
here's the problem, and it just goes back to running routes is good. He'll be on the field, but it goes back to just Jahan Dotson not being good at getting open. Yeah. So like he's running 3 times as many routes as Zacchaeus in recent weeks, and he's getting half the target share. Now, obviously, it's not completely apples to apples. One team throws more than the other, whatever, in any of those games. But like, they're similarly priced. They're comparable on this slate. Do you prefer the Washington guys that are going to get more, like a higher target share on fewer routes, or do you want the guy that's just out there running wind sprints for the Eagles? I don't think there's like a right answer.
Yeah, agreed. The other thing from
he didn't die in Philly.
He was good for his rookie year. Like there are parts of his rookie year where he showed promise. At least, like he had a couple spike weeks where got everybody excited for his sophomore year. Like, oh, he's going to break out, and then he just was not good.
He ran good on touchdowns his rookie season. So like his rookie season, he scored a lot of touchdowns, and there was excitement about him because he was scoring touchdowns. But there was, if you looked at like separation data and looked at underlying numbers, there were big red flags. Like, is this guy actually good? And then last season, those red flags, if I remember correctly, got even worse as far as him separating. He didn't get all the random touchdowns, and it was like, okay, this guy is actually not very good. And then they brought in the new front office, new coaching staff, and they shipped him out of town.
Yep. I was also going to say, as far as the narrative goes, the revenge narrative, probably it actually affects like the amount that it should bump ownership projections is probably greater than the amount that it should affect actual projections for a player like Dotson. Like maybe a lot of people, like I'm guessing he gets a slight ownership bump because people want to play the narrative, whereas like the actual projection bump would be like negligible if anybody wants to give him any kind of projection boost. So that's another factor when you think about the revenge potential there. I want to touch on a few things in chat. So first of all, Rob B asks, is this a new site? I follow both these guys. I think he is in the Endgame Syndicate chat. And Endgame Syndicate, I'm not involved with it other than doing these shows with Adam, but it is a new site as of just a few months ago. I mean, what, 6 months now at this point, Adam?
4, 5, 6, somewhere in there. I think we launched in like June. But yeah, new site, still working on building some stuff out over there. But it's Utical, Nerdy Tenor, Brick75, and myself. And the goal is just to kind of teach you how to fish, make you better at DFS, aimed for, like intermediate and higher level players. We have Discord. We have a bunch of instructional videos, again, targeted at, intermediate and higher level players. Just the kind of stuff that I think we all, or at least me specifically, kind of wish it existed throughout the time where like we were trying to go from, solid DFS players to better without, losing as much money and making as many mistakes as I think a lot of us made throughout the time. So really good Discord over there. A lot of, I think, high quality videos, just a lot of, strategic conversations, thought-provoking stuff, talking about ways to improve and all of that. And we all have different skill sets too. Nerdy, really good at coding, Yuta, really good at everything, but kind of pays more attention, like ball knowing type stuff. I'm kind of in the middle, less so, kind of with Brick, like less so than Yuta, but I still pay attention to that stuff. Obviously can't code at all, but we all have different approaches, different styles. We've all had varying levels of success with it. So I think it's a good group of guys to kind of just learn from, bounce ideas off of. And again, we have some other stuff that we're working on that'll be coming out sooner than later also.
Yeah, so not your standard DFS site, but definitely worth checking out. A lot of sharp people, it sounds like, in the Discord. RBLS, how many times do you think Hurts gets sacked tonight? I haven't looked at the like pressure rates, like how Washington, how often they blitz, stuff like that, but probably gets sacked a few times tonight. AJ says Calcaterra in the optimal. We'll get to tight ends. I don't know what to make of Calcaterra tonight, but yeah, we will get there. Thank you, Dallas. All right, let's see. I wanted to, how many captains would y'all use in a 20 max? I don't know exactly, but probably like 5 would be my guess. Like I'm probably just not going to the like the really borderline captain options, probably just sticking to like the quarterbacks, the top receivers, and running backs most likely. But it's kind of I don't think that there's a wrong answer here. Adam, do you have a thought on how many captains you'd use in a 20 max?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like approach it that way. There's never like a target number for me. I agree with you. Like I assume that I can make good lineups that I want to play with Hurts, with Daniels, with Barkley, certainly with Brown, McLaurin, Smith. Like there's 6 guys that I wouldn't be surprised at all if they showed up. All of those guys have like 6+% chances of being the optimal captain for me. I would guess somewhere between like 4 and 7. I'd be surprised if I didn't have a single lineup in 20 max with Hurts, Daniels, Barkley, Brown at captain. I would expect I have at least one with like McLaurin, Smith, and then I wouldn't be shocked if I had like one with somebody else.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds about right. Kind of a risk tolerance thing to some extent. Like I think you make good lineups with many different captains, but it's probably more fun if you're playing a 20 max to just focus on the few guys and pick a few that you want to play. All right. Any other? You going any Johnny Wilson or Enos Smith?
Not really. Like 3% chances of being optimal for both guys. They're both cheap. Smith, obviously, less expensive than Johnny Wilson. Both about 3% projected ownership. So they're just in that bucket with Will Shipley, with Dotson, different price point, but similar chances of success and ownership. Wilson running routes last week. Just lost the page. I think it was like 20-ish%, 20 to 30% route participation for Johnny Wilson last week, 27%. Aeneas Smith was at 33%. So, if you wanted to, I think I saw somebody mention it in chat. If you wanted to kind of just hope somebody steps up, like play the trend, he was somebody that missed the beginning of the season, ran routes on about 10% of dropbacks in week 8, ran routes on 6% in week 9, 33% last week. 18% target share. Like, it's easier to make a case for the Smith emergence in this game than it is for like Dotson or Johnny Wilson based on what we've seen recently, especially if you throw out the narrative for Dotson. There's at least, what if Smith just kind of starts running more routes than Dotson because he's
calling out my pronunciation there. I forgot that was just a hot best ball summer. Like people kept calling him that, and now it just stuck with me to call him that. I should probably adjust how I actually pronounce his name because it's almost certainly Aeneas, right? Like that's got to be the right
that
pronunciation.
Absolutely it, yes.
Yeah, it's just I got too used to people saying it that way. All right. Yeah, Johnny Wilson also like just a big guy, maybe a little bit more likely for an end zone target. So you can make a case there. More of a like 150 max sprinkle in type play, not a huge priority. All right. Anything else on? We still have to do the commander side. Terry McLaurin, of course, the pretty clear wide receiver one there for the Commanders, projecting for about 13 fantasy points here. About the same, 13.5 at Roto Grinders, projecting for 31% ownership in the flex. At Captain, McLaurin projecting for 6% ownership. So not crazy high ownership on Terry McLaurin. What do you get into there, Adam?
28% projected ownership for McLaurin, 28% chance of being optimal for me. Same at Captain, 6 and 6. Very, very high upside play. The problem is that he's relatively expensive, not even necessarily compared to like his projection or his role or his upside or anything. It's that I think he's just a lower priority than the quarterbacks, Barkley and Brown, and he kind of just ends up being the guy that gets left out a bit. So I think the ownership's pretty much correct. He's clearly the wide receiver one here. We're seeing him play at a higher level produce at a higher level, not play, because he's always been very good. He's just never had good quarterback play to work with. We're seeing him produce at a higher level than he ever has. I expect that to continue because Daniels is the best quarterback he's ever played with. So looks really good here. It's just you start getting into the issues of like, okay, well, am I dropping Hurts? Am I dropping Daniels? Am I dropping Brown? Am I dropping, Barkley? So that's why you're seeing him as the 5th highest owned guy, is you just have 4 other studs in this game also.
Eagles defense has allowed the 3rd fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receivers. They are not positive in any spot for wide receivers as far as where they're lining up. Not as bad for slot receivers, I guess, and receivers lining up out wide right, but not a great matchup for anybody. But, you get the kind of volume that McLaurin gets, probably totally fine anyway.
Which, I mean, you mentioned wide receivers lining up outside right, which is just kind of funny because of the meme of Terry McLaurin does not leave the left side of the field typically. So
good point. Yeah. So not the best matchup for Terry McLaurin, but he's going to get enough volume, talented enough receiver, not a huge issue there. Behind Terry McLaurin, somebody was asking earlier if Noah Brown is the clear wide receiver 2 now. I would say yes, Noah Brown is the clear wide receiver 2 for the Commanders. Over the past 3 games, 77.8% route participation, 18 targets. So pretty nice role there for Noah Brown. He is also 6,200 and going to get a fair amount of ownership, I think. At Captain, Noah Brown coming in at 7% ownership. At Flex, Noah Brown coming in at 31% ownership. So I think this feels a little bit higher. I feel like I've seen lower elsewhere, but project for like nearly 40% ownership, quite a bit for Noah Brown. So the field is kind of onto it. Adam, how much are you getting into of Noah Brown?
Yeah, I have his ownership projection lower at like 23% flex, 3% captain, and that's pretty much in line with where I think it should be. 20% chance of being optimal for me in flex. 6,200, I think, is the problem. Again, kind of like with it's an issue on this slate too. It's a little high for his projection. I think he is the clear wide receiver too. He is on a good offense. He has, I think, played pretty well this year when given opportunities. Also, he's made some pretty big plays for them. But when you're paying 6,200, it's an expensive enough price tag that it's going to cost you something at the top end. And there's so much to like at the top end here that would you rather play like DeVonta Smith plus Noah Brown? Or would you rather play Saquon Barkley plus
Luke McCaffrey?
Plus a defense or something.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the 2v2 type questions that you're going to get into with Noah Brown, where I think he's kind of like, even though he's obviously less expensive than those top 5 guys or top 6 guys, if you want to include DeVonta Smith, I think that relatively he's more overpriced than they are for their production and upside. So that's what's keeping his ownership in check. That's what's keeping his optimal rate in check. But he is still the wide receiver too on a very, very, very good offense.
Yeah. So looks okay. It looks overowned to me based on Rotogrander's numbers, where it's coming in 38% total ownership. But where you have him, that does feel a lot better. Like I think I would kind of like him at those. You said like 23% flex ownership. Like if that comes in, I would want to be over the field there. I think even at the hefty price tag. But yeah, not like a huge priority, but I would say that yes, he is the pretty clear wide receiver 2 for the Commanders. And I do kind of like it. Beyond Noah Brown, we have I don't know what to make of Olamide Zaccheaus. So he projects not poorly, so I guess not that well. Over 3 fantasy points here. He's 3,000. I've seen some places that have him with a pretty hefty projection. Let's see. Yeah, 5 fantasy points here at Rotogrinders. It's tough because the role seems to be declining, at least as far as route participation goes, but also the targets are still kind of there for Olamide Zaccheaus, which feels a little bit fluky to me on the season. So 31 targets on 33% route participation in 10 games on the season. Over the past 2 games, still has 5 targets. So like just slightly south is in terms of targets. Like the target share has declined slightly, but also just 21% route participation over the past 2 weeks. So it has the role seems to be decreasing as Noah Brown's role increases. I don't know. What do you make of it with Olamide Zaccheaus, Adam?
Yeah, I think it's just the route participation is decreasing, like you said. He's clearly behind Noah Brown. We did see Luke McCaffrey also run more routes, a higher percentage of routes last week than he has since, I think, week 6. And that is somebody that would make sense for him to kind of come on later in the season, being a rookie, not having a ton of wide receiver experience in college either. And so he's somebody that probably continues to kind of to run routes ahead of Zaccheaus at this point. But at 3K, there are some ways this game can go where he just needs a few catches if the right guys that you pair him with, go nuts, those guys at the top. So yeah, I think he's projected for like 10% ownership. I have him optimal 11% of the time. He's not super likely to get there. He's not very likely to have a big game. He doesn't project that well. I have him at like 4.3 DraftKings points, but it just kind of comes back to, we don't have any sub 4K guy on the slate that really looks great or that you're going to be able to make a really strong case for. Like I can make maybe this guy plays a bigger role than is being projected case for Ainias Smith or for Luke McCaffrey, who are both really cheap. And it does make them really interesting on this slate. But that's different than making a case of like Luke McCaffrey is going to have a good game or Ainias Smith is going to have a good game. Like they're probably not. Right. There's nobody cheap on this slate that I am confident is having a good game. And when that happens, basically you're just getting a bucket of guys where you want to be kind of just mixing and matching them at relatively low rates because individually they're pretty unlikely to succeed, but collectively as a group, it's still a useful bucket of guys because the expensive guys on the slate are so good and so likely to succeed and kind of pull them up from an optimal standpoint.
Right. So you just need to, it's difficult to predict who is going to be the one, but like one of these guys is probably going to put up a score that's going to be good enough because they allow you to get to all of the studs. Even if it's not like a great score, you just need like the best of the group that allows you to pay up for the studs. And Zaccheaus seems like a fine bet there. as we mentioned. So you can see here the route participation over time. Steep decline, 57% in week 7 for Zacchaeus, then down to 37%, 20%, 22%. So kind of a decline there. Luke McCaffrey, like you said, up to 43% last week. So that's higher than it had been since week 5. So, kind of strong route participation. You kind of hope for a rookie like McCaffrey, like maybe he does come on more toward the end of the season. So that is kind of hopeful. And then what else do we have?
A couple other things there too. Zacchaeus possibly gives you punt return touchdown upside. Don't know if he's going to keep that role. He kind of not cost them the game, but was very bad last week. Muffed 2 punts, lost 1 in his own red zone. So I don't know if he continues returning punts or not. Also, McCaffrey, if just from a production standpoint, not only did he run more routes last week than he had in a while, he was a Jayden Daniels missed pass away from having a massive game. Daniels, it would have been probably like an 80 or 90 yard touchdown if Daniels could have hit the throw. So, just there's that also. But the thing that I do like about McCaffrey here is, one, he's just cheaper than all these other guys. But like you were saying, it makes sense, and I said it too, like it makes sense logically for McCaffrey to have a bigger role at the end of the season for Washington than at the beginning of the season. And that role is very clearly wide open. Like Terry McLaurin is your clear wide receiver 1, Noah Brown's your wide receiver 2. You have Zach Ertz working the middle of the field at tight end. You do not have a wide receiver 3 on this team that is good at all. So there is a clear role for him to step into, kind of like there is for Ainias Smith on the Philadelphia side, because Jahan Dotson being your wide receiver 3 is not somebody that is holding off talented players if they show that they can get it done.
Yeah, that's a really good point on both of them. Luke McCaffrey, I'm sold on him now. So I didn't write him up in my full game articles because I was like, man, nothing really stands out here. But he actually looks like he's kind of intriguing for all the reasons that we've talked about. Like just based on his role last week, like that's kind of intriguing enough for a $1,200 receiver. And then you factor in that he's a rookie and maybe gets more route participation, more usage as the season goes on. I do really like Luke McCaffrey, the more we're talking about him, but is projected for some ownership, 16%. I think I still like it enough that I want to be on top of that number. But what are you getting to with McCaffrey?
Yeah, I have him projected for 13. I have him showing up optimal 15%. So,
okay.
Just to, I guess, kind of put everything back in context, he's sort of Kenneth Gainwell as far as he's like one of the best of the cheap plays. The thing that is nice about him versus Gainwell, though, is that you do have, ignoring Gainwell's upside if Saquon Barkley gets hurt,
right?
You have more of there is some chance that going into week 12, we look back and say, wow, week 11 was the Luke McCaffrey breakout game. Now he has this bigger role than he has previously this year. There is a 0% chance without Barkley getting hurt that we go into week 12 saying, holy shit, Kenneth Gainwell is the number 1 running back on the Eagles.
Right.
Not going to happen. So, there is a little bit more volatility in the role for McCaffrey a lot more volatility in the role for McCaffrey than there is for Gainwell.
Yeah, there's volatility in the standalone role for McCaffrey.
Right.
Like Gainwell, he's not going to gain more of a standalone role, but like obviously has awesome contingent upside. I think that is a good breakdown of who Luke McCaffrey is. Outside of McCaffrey, so we have Zacchaeus coming in at about 19% ownership. So to me, I think I prefer McCaffrey over Zacchaeus, and then he's coming in lower owned. He's also
I haven't
cheaper.
projected for more ownership, but I also prefer him.
Okay. And then who else do we have? Anybody else we need to think about on the Commanders receivers? Diami Brown. Yeah. 22%.
Diami Brown is cheaper Zacchaeus. And it is interesting. He's getting a little bit less ownership. Not going to run a ton of routes, 20 to 30% route participation. He's a deep ball threat. Always has been, hasn't emerged as like a consistent NFL wide receiver, but he's always been a deep ball threat. He's another one where if he could catch, he would have had a better stat line last week. Dropped a wide open touchdown in the end zone, hit him right in the hands. But he's like Zacchaeus, except he's cheaper at 1,600. He'll be on the field 20 to 30% of routes, and maybe he catches a deep ball, maybe he doesn't. Zacchaeus more of a possession receiver than Diami Brown is. So I think you do get more home run upside from Diami Brown.
Yeah, agree with that. Looks fine at sub 10% to me. Like that feels about right. And then I think that does it for all of the wide receivers that we need to talk about. Anybody else for you?
No, I think that's every active wide receiver.
Okay, perfect. Dallas Goedert came back last week. Man, at least at fantasy points projected for the same as Zach Ertz, both projected for 8.5 fantasy points. Dallas Goedert, let's see, projected for, actually worse than Zach Ertz. Interesting at Roto-Grinders. He is 6,600, projected for 21% flex ownership in the captain spot. Dallas Goedert projected for 3% ownership. So not crazy high ownership going to Dallas Goedert, sub 25% total at 6,600. Kind of like it. I don't know. What are you getting to of Dallas Goedert?
Yeah, 17% chance of being optimal for me. I think he looks fine at 6,600, but it is a relatively expensive price tag. And you just get back to the same issue that I was saying with like Noah Brown. It's going to be the same issue that you're going to have with Zach Ertz, although to a lesser extent, because Ertz is $1,000 less expensive and does project similarly to Goddard, like you said. But it's just he's expensive enough that he's making it that much more difficult to get that one extra stud from this game in a game where you have such concentrated production to a group of guys at the top. But he did run routes 70% of the time last week. Clearly, he's the number one tight end here. You know, we had a 20% target share for Calcaterra last week, but he only ran routes on 33% of dropbacks. Pretty fluky, 20% target share for him. Not to say that he's a bad play at 1K or anything. I think, he's around 10% to be optimal at that price. He's still going to have a role, but Goddard is clearly ahead of him. And you don't want to just look at last week's target share and conclude that like it's a timeshare between Calcaterra and Goddard or anything like that. Goddard very clearly is already back ahead of him in his return.
Yeah, and I also I wonder if Goddard, they're kind of easing him back in. So maybe the 70% last week could come up for Dallas Goedert, which would then eat into Calcaterra, which is the reason that I'm not super enthusiastic about Calcaterra. It's not that I don't think I think he's a fine play, but he's a fine play more along the lines of he'll probably get 20% route participation, might see 2 targets, maybe he'll score a touchdown. So I think he falls back into the he's a backup tight end that you'll want if he scores a touchdown, maybe slightly better than the average in that he did run 33% of routes last week, but he didn't really do anything in the time that I remember, in the time that Dallas Goedert was out, that would make you think that he is going to he earned a bigger role or anything like that. I think it's just he's going to be back up to Dallas Goedert, probably not going to play a ton. Dallas Goedert, it's tough because a lot of his playing time this year has also been without AJ Brown and or DeVonta Smith. So I think that his target share may be higher. He has sorry, that's Zach Ertz. 1 second. 31 targets on 74.7% route participation in 5 games. So that would be, just over 6 targets per game. That's pretty good usage for Dallas Goedert. But I think at least one of those games is out both of DeVonta Smith and AJ Brown. Also, the Commanders' defense has allowed the 10th fewest schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game to tight end, so not a great spot for Dallas Goedert. I don't know. Ultimately, I think 6,600 at around 25% ownership feels about right to me. I don't know, not taking any huge stand there.
Yeah, same page. He's good and he's on a good offense, but he's also obviously behind both of AJ Brown and DeVonta Smith in terms of target share. You have Saquon Barkley getting targets and working around the goal line, cutting into touchdown equity along with Jalen Hurts. So the price tag here, I think, is basically you're paying for the talent, you're paying for the role as tight end 1 in this offense, but also, those things are nice, but he's also competing with a lot of really talented playmakers on his team that are, kind of ahead of him in terms of opportunities. So I think he's just kind of a completely fine middle of the road play.
Not UM says last week might be distorted because starters got pulled. That's an interesting note. So
yeah, I actually wanted to go back and see how many routes Smith ran in the first 3 quarters.
Yeah, could it have been 100%? Wait, you mean DeVonta Smith?
No, I mean Aeneas.
Oh yeah, good point. Let's see. Can I split this out this way? No, not this one. Let me see. Advanced receiving. Here, I'm going to do it real quick. So week 10, split it out by quarter. So we can see exactly how many routes he ran in the first 3 quarters.
Aeneas Smith ran 0 routes in the first half.
Yeah.
Wait,
Which
no, he had 0 yards in the first half. He ran 1 route in the first half.
Okay. All right, let's see. I'm going to sort by quarter here. So in the fourth quarter, actually not. So 3 routes run for Jahan Dotson in the fourth quarter. 1 for AJ Brown, 1 for Dallas Goedert, 3 for Jahan Dotson, 2 for Aeneas Smith, 2 for Johnny Wilson. Did they run any? So Johnny Wilson in the third quarter ran 1 route. Aeneas Smith ran 2 routes in the third quarter. Grant Calcaterra ran 1. So Calcaterra not really affected. Doesn't seem much.
Yeah, 38% route participation in the first half last week for Calcaterra. 86% for Goddard.
Wait, so what was it for Calcaterra?
38%.
Oh, interesting. So he actually first half was running a lot of routes.
Yeah,
so they ran
had higher route participation in the first half.
Yeah, and they ran a significant amount together then also.
Yep.
It's kind of interesting. Maybe it sticks. Maybe Calcaterra has earned a bigger role. They liked what they saw blocking wise or something, because he didn't do much as a receiver as far as I remember. But maybe he was still good in other aspects of the game. So ultimately, I mean, 10% ownership to Calcaterra coming in at flex feels fine to me. Doesn't really seem like a place I really want to take a stand.
Yeah. The only actual takeaway that I just got from what we did, well, one, it's a slight positive for Calcaterra that, he was running a lot of routes with Goddard, also a plus for Goddard that he ran so many routes. I do want to backtrack. Like, I think Aeneas Smith is still fine to take a chance on at $800, but everything I said about maybe him stepping up because he had a 33% route share or route participation can go out the window, because good call in chat. That was score based.
Yeah. Not UM says that's a pretty cool feature. Yeah, by the way, if you want to get access to the Fantasy Points data suite or anything at Fantasy Points, you can use promo code Flannelverse to get 50% off. So yeah, check that out if you want to check out the features we're using. Of course, as I pointed out on other shows, the schedule adjusted page, this is actually free for the rest of the season, so you don't need any kind of promo code. You can just get this one for free at fantasypoints.com. But if you want access to any of the paid stuff, the content or the data suite, any of that, you can get 50% off with promo code Flannelverse. All right. Beyond those two, I don't think Jack Stoll, not particularly interesting to me for the Eagles. You get into any Jack Stoll?
No, I don't think I even had him in when I ran my stuff.
Zach Ertz projecting here the same and better for Roto Grinders than Dallas Goedert. He has been pretty consistent just in terms of like both route participation and target share. 24% projected ownership in the flex for Zach Ertz. In the captain spot, we have Zach Ertz coming in at 4% projected ownership. And of course, Adam, most importantly, this is a revenge game for Zach Ertz. So how much do you get into of Zach Ertz?
Like 25, 26%. He's projected for about 24 to 25% ownership. Yeah, revenge game and also makeup game after not being able to run an extra half yard down the field to get a first down last week to end that game. But yeah, I mean, he's clearly got a good role in this offense. It's a high-powered offense. He's not a high-powered player, but you're just getting, short targets over the middle of the field, racking up PPR points. I think he's one of the better mid-range values. Like, he's a little bit cheaper than Noah Brown. He's cheaper than Dallas Goedert. He's only $400 more than Jake Elliott. He's $600 or $800 more than Zane Gonzalez. So yeah, he's kind of priced in that like kicker wide receiver 2 range, and you don't have running back 2s in this range. You only have one wide receiver 2 because DeVonta Smith is more expensive. So he kind of just like sits in this range and is going to be a really useful piece, I think.
Yeah, seems not bad. Are you getting into any Ertz at captain?
Like 3-4%.
Okay, so you're right with the field. Yeah, looks good. Who's your preference if you had to choose between Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz? Given that Ertz coming in at slightly more ownership, but he's also cheaper. So I don't know. Do you have a preference, or is that just kind of a dumb question because you're going to play both of them?
I mean, I'm going to play both, but Ertz is showing up as optimal 26% for me. Goddard at 17. So like the preference is Ertz. Like they project similarly. I have Ertz slightly higher. Ertz is cheaper. I think you could make the case that Goddard has the higher ceiling. Just because he's a more dynamic player than Ertz is, outside of like an extremely broken play, it's hard to envision Ertz like housing a 60-yard pass for a touchdown. Right. it's not that difficult to envision Goddard doing it. Still would be a broken play, but I think in Ertz's case, you would need like multiple people to like physically die on the field for him to beat them to the end zone from 60 yards out.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, I think that is right. And then are you getting to, do we have any backup? Is Bates still there? I think Bates is still there. And Ben Sinnott. Yeah, that's right. Ben Sinnott only 200. Let's look at the route share report here.
Yeah, Bates has been ahead of Sinnott. Had been ahead. 5% route participation for Bates last week. Sinnott was at 5% also. 32% in week 9 for Bates, 20% for Sinnott, 17 week 8 for Bates, 11% for Sinnott. Neither of them are likely to get targets. They're both very, very cheap. If you want to mix them in here or there, fine. I guess Sinnott's the higher upside guy because like he's the young, talented pass catcher that just hasn't gotten onto the field yet. Maybe he's more likely to have his one catch go for like a massive play, I think. Bates, I guess you could say, is more likely to have his one catch be from the 3-yard line for a touchdown.
Yeah.
Neither is likely to score a fantasy point, period.
Yeah, they're both like mix in a 150 set, probably not playing in a 20 max set because like I said, I mean, that's really low route participation, 5.4%. That's like 2 routes probably for each of them. Yeah, not a lot that's encouraging there for the tight ends, the backup tight ends for the Commanders. Anything else on tight ends?
No.
Okay, I think that we've talked about all of the defenses and kickers. I guess we can take a look at the ownership. In the flex, we've got Jake Elliott coming in at 18%, Zane Gonzalez coming in at 18.5%, Eagles defense 14%, Commanders defense 16%. As usual, I'd say these numbers feel a little bit, I mean, I guess the kickers feel about right at around 18.5%. The defenses feel a little bit low to me. I don't know, how much you get into of the kickers and defenses?
I think they all kind of just look pretty correct. Zane Gonzalez, obviously it's tough to really talk about kicker talent, but like Austin Sievert's been really, really good for Washington this year. I think it's pretty safe to say Gonzalez probably isn't as good as him. But he's also only 4,800. And, this is an offense that's very good at moving the ball. And then that's just good for kickers because, if they don't get in the end zone, you're just talking about racking up field goals. So I think, Gonzalez at the cheaper price tag looks pretty good, even though, he's not a proven commodity. Elliott at 5,200 looks fine. Both defenses, I think, look okay. It is worth noting, because like both offenses obviously are very good. Philadelphia has allowed the 5th highest pressure rate above expectation so far, or pressure rate over expectation using fantasy points data so far this season. Washington's defense has been above average in pressure rate over expectation as well. So it does set up, going back to that sack question, as a good spot for that for Washington. Philadelphia also has been good at getting pressure. Washington has been, I don't know where they are, middle of the road in protecting Jayden Daniels, and obviously both quarterbacks are good at scrambling and evading sacks, but there is sack upside here for both of these defensive lines.
I feel like coming into the year, Washington was supposed to have the worst offensive line in the league. Like by most of the rankings that I saw, they were supposed to have just a terrible offensive line, but they're league average, you said?
Yeah, they were kind of they were difficult, if I remember correctly. Like I don't pay any attention to this kind of stuff. I just remember reading it in the offseason. They were kind of a really tough offensive line, I think, to like
get a read on.
Because they had a lot of guys that didn't have like track records of being good NFL players, but they also just had a lot of guys that didn't have track records of being anything. So it was kind of like they're probably not going to be good. But like if I remember kind of reading from one of the Washington like writers, you could make a bull case for like all of their starters being a good player.
Okay.
It was just, is this actually who they are or not?
Yep. And they, better than expected. So good for them. All right. I think that is the entire breakdown. Did we miss anything? I don't think we missed anything here. So I think that is going to do it for the breakdown. Adam, where can people find you? Where can they find your work, etc.?
Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. My DFS content on the Endgame Syndicate YouTube channel. Nothing coming up there for me today, but I will be back there tomorrow talking NBA DFS tournaments on DraftKings for the Friday NBA slate.
Josh Gillimas, best value plays. I would say I'm sold now on Luke McCaffrey, Kenneth Gainwell.
I think it's McCaffrey.
Yeah. I also did want to note about the Zane Gonzalez is 5,000 on FanDuel. So for those of you playing on FanDuel, it's obviously a different equation. That is, I think min price for any position on FanDuel is 5,000. So Zane Gonzalez just mispriced there. I saw somebody lamenting it in chat above, but I still like. He could still fail. Like, it's one of those things that's like he's clearly underpriced and like he's a great play. Currently not projected for crazy high ownership, but I still think like there are paths to failure. So I'm not that upset about the min price Zane Gonzalez on FanDuel. Any thoughts on $5,000 Zane Gonzalez on FanDuel, Adam?
I have no idea how FanDuel pricing works. When I post comments, do they show up in both chats or just mine? If I post them in StreamYard.
I think maybe just mine actually. Like I'm not entirely sure. So I learned that it is just one of the two in watching Davis and Liam do a stream together. So in watching that learned like Davis kept posting in response to people in Liam's chat, and they weren't seeing it because he was posting it into his own chat or vice versa, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So it was responding.
They're saying that they can see me, what I say in mine, but I was replying to Steven Leibowitz in yours and deleted it because I realized that nobody would know what I was talking about because he posted it.
Yeah. So if it's in mine, I assume that yours goes into mine, but I'm not entirely, because mine was the first stream setup. Like I said, I don't know how it worked because Davis.
They're saying it's in mine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. That's funny. Okay. That's going to do it for the show. Go check out Endgame Syndicate. Did you finish telling people? Yeah, you did. You finished. So go check out Endgame Syndicate if you have not already done so. Check out the Flannel Rest. We're trying to grow our subscriber base. So do it if you haven't done so. All right. Thank you guys very much. You can find me tonight. I will be back 90 minutes prior to the game, or 85 minutes prior to the game, breaking it down once again once we have inactives tonight. So hopefully you will join me once again. Thanks, everybody. We will catch you later.
Damn, Brandon.